Just a quick message to our audience out there. Please remember to like, share, follow, and subscribe. It really helps our content reach more people, and it adds to our algorithm. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for another episode of On Patrol with the Suffolk PBA. I'm CJ Hunter, the treasurer of the PBA.
I'm Tanner Brandemar, the sergeant at arms of the PBA.
And today we're excited to have John Hnat, the first vice president of the PBA, on with us, and Chris Wolf, the legislative director of the PBA. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
So today, one of the things we want to talk about is some recent wins we've had up in Albany, stuff that's going to benefit our members short-term and long-term into the future. Now, Chris, part of your role as legislative director, you're full-time up in Albany, lobbying on behalf of our members and police officers throughout the state. So tell us a little bit about the process up there, a little bit about what you were working on this session, and we'll talk about the wins we've had.
So something that we've talked about previously here was one of the main goals we've been going after were pension reforms. And in terms of Albany, this year was one of the biggest where we were finally able to accomplish getting some of that done. And what it looks like is, so as you said, I'm up there full time. So I'll go up on a Monday, stay up through Thursday. I'm up there walking the halls of what we call the LOB, the Legislative Office Building. Then I'll go over to the Capitol and try and advance all these ideas that benefit our membership. And in terms of this session, the most important thing were those pension reforms. We've been working on it over the course of the last several years, but for Tier 5 and 6 guys, this was finally the year where they were receptive and we got it done.
Yeah, so, obviously after the initial pension reforms that created Tier 5 in 2009 took place, and then another follow-up edition of reforms that created Tier 6 in 2012, we've been trying to get some benefits back and do some rollbacks to put our newer members more in line with some of our senior members. So, part of the reason why people want to become cops to begin with is the early retirement and the ability to retire when you're still young in your 40s, because you can't really run around chasing bad guys in your 60s, right? It's different than other kinds of jobs. So, John, we always refer to you as the human calculator, right? I mean, you specialize in numbers and working out benefits. Tell us a little bit about what you've seen from the most recent rollbacks with the change of the contribution rates.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is definitely, was it as much of a decrease as we wanted? No, but we all know we've been in this game long enough. Everything in the government operates on a snail's pace. So if you look at the totality of the changes to Tier 6, going back to when we got rid of the 5-year final average salary,
right?
That's a huge, huge savings. Where now, Tier 6 members brought in line with Tier 5 and, Tier 2. Now that you have the reduction in contributions, going forward. A big thing that I think kind of gets lost in all this is the overtime exclusion. So, as part of the pension reform, they extended the overtime exclusion. So essentially how the overtime contributions, the pension contributions work. So when a Tier 6 member is hired, your first 2+ years are fixed based on whatever your starting salary is. So most of our members will come in, they'll start at 50-something thousand. They're going to be locked at 3% for those first few years. After that, it's a 2-year look back. So after your 2.5, 3 years, it looks back 2 years. But now what the state says is overtime from that period is going to be excluded. So that should also, keep your rate, somewhat, your contribution rate somewhat lower.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up how this isn't just about the wins this session. We've had several wins over the course of several sessions, right? So we're kind of chipping away at it. But you're right. When it comes to those contribution rates and excluding overtime, that could be the difference of savings of hundreds of dollars for a member in a given year, or in some cases, maybe even thousands of dollars in a given year.
Exactly. And now, you have what's called an opportunity cost. You have that money where it could be deployed elsewhere. You could use it to save for a home. You could put it into deferred compensation. So it's all part of the same big bucket.
Right. And, one of the things that I don't want to get lost in all of this too is this was something that was necessary for New York State to do to help with our recruitment crisis here in New York State, right? I mean, in Suffolk County, which is largely considered to be the gold standard of police jobs, we've seen huge decreases in applicants wanting to become cops out here too. So it's not like it's exclusive to small departments somewhere that are struggling to recruit, or even gigantic departments. Like you always hear about recruitment issues in New York City too, but it's even affecting us. So hopefully this is something that helps with recruiting more people and getting more applicants to take our tests again in the future.
Yeah, I would say that was an overwhelming theme for the last several years up in Albany, is recruitment and retention, keeping people in the job and getting people to take the job. Law enforcement in general, I know you've talked on other podcasts about the difficulties we've faced over the last couple of years. Socially, we see the short videos, people monetizing, attacking law enforcement and stuff. But what we focused on was the benefit side of it, and that was the pension side, and trying to make the arguments up there to the legislators about the recruitment and retention and the benefit of these pension reforms, bringing in people and getting them reinterested in municipal employment. It is still difficult for them to see these pictures and videos that people are posting online of, people getting attacked, cursed at, donuts on fishing lines and stuff. But what helps is knowing that the system is getting enhanced, and you'll have an easier time in your retirement, an easier time during the beginning of your career in terms of contribution, money in your pocket, to whether it be to buy your first house, get married, raise your first kid, making the argument that keeping that money in those people's pockets during those important times in their life and stuff, that should ultimately help recruitment. Definitely.
I think John made a great point too about like what you could do, especially with the exclusion of overtime and especially the contribution limits for recruitment, especially. I mean, making $50,000 doesn't go really as long as it used to go anymore. Inflation's hit us hard ever since COVID.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, it's I feel, I have 3 young children, and they're coming into such a different world than, we grew up in, and it's going to be tough.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to, the prior session wins too, and getting our pensionable earnings back down to a 3-year average versus a 5-year average, John, you and I have spoken about this several times, and part of that often gets overlooked is the look back on those averages as well. Maybe you could break that down and explain that a little bit to everybody.
Sure. So the initial iteration of Tier 6 had a 5-year final average salary. What a lot of people don't know about it was there was a 4-year look back. So it was actually your top 9 years of earnings. So if you had a cop potentially, not many Suffolk cops leave at 20 years, but if you left at 20, your 11th year of earnings was, for all intents and purposes, part of your pension calculations. Mm-hmm. So getting that down from 5 with a 4-year look back to 3 with a 2-year look back, like Tiers 5 and Tier 2, is, a huge step in the right direction.
Right. I feel like that's one of those things that a lot of people don't appreciate it, but that was a huge win for pensionable earnings. And it's one of those things that's going to benefit our members for the rest of their lifetime when you talk about lifetime earnings.
Yes, most definitely. And again, we have our members getting ready for retirement, and they kind of, they know they're in that window. To take that window, they're doing it for 3 years. To take that window out to 5, 9 years, right? That's tough.
And, one of the other things I don't want to lose sight on is the vesting period too. Right. Tier 2 was a 5-year vesting. When Tier 6 was created, it was a 10-year vesting period. So you weren't entitled to any pension benefit unless you did at least 10 years of service, unless you were disabled in the line of duty. Mm-hmm. So being able to at least afford people the option of some sort of vested retirement at the 5-year mark instead of 10 is another huge step in the right direction.
Yeah. And I think that goes to show you, like, we're covering a lot of different topics here, and it goes to show you how Albany works and what I do up there over the course of years it takes to cumulatively put together an entire package. So, you have the vesting period, you have the overtime exclusion, now you finally have the Tier 5 and 6 enhancements that we won this session, but it's taken years to get there. And, I walked the halls up there with guys who were, when Tier 1 transitioned into Tier 2, they spent, from what I've heard from them, it took 20 years to bring Tier 2 kind of not in line. They weren't comparable, but to get enhancements. That took 20 years. What we've accomplished in, 10 plus years for Tier 5 and 6, and more so in the recent, last 4 years, last 2 legislative sessions has been, profound, absolutely profound. And in people who are much more experienced up there are shocked at what we've been able to do. So
over the last several years, fixed Tier 6 became like a rallying cry. And sometimes we would hear from our Tier 5 members, like, hey, don't forget about us. Like, we're here too. Mm-hmm. Our benefits are reduced from what the Tier 2 guys had too. So this year we were able to get some wins for Tier 5 as well when it came to the overtime earnings. So John, maybe you could explain a little bit about how the overtime earnings being pensionable now for Tier 5 has been a big benefit.
Yeah, sure. And to your point, yeah, our Tier 5 members sometimes do feel left out. And that's a big part of that window was so small, when
right.
Tier 5 was passed in, essentially 2000, beginning of 2010. And then by 12, we had, Tier 6. So, that's very small cohort of our members. But yeah, big point there. So now the 15% overtime cap went to 25% for both Tier 6 and Tier 5. So that's a really, that's going to be a big help as far as those members, working on their final average salaries.
Right. And I think a big aspect of that to keep in mind is when we're talking about the 15% and 25%, that's based on your wages walking through the door. It's not just base pay, because we have other longevity payments. We have other stuff that our members earn because of the schedules we work, the holidays, the weekends. We have other stuff that is included to create that percentage.
Correct. Yeah. No, and that's a great point. When we're talking about, salary, we're talking about base pay, we're talking about night diff, longevity, holiday pay, so on and so forth. So again, you have to base it on that, that total number, not just the base pay.
Right. That makes a huge difference for our guys.
Yep.
Now, Chris, you started hitting on it a little bit. When you're up there up in Albany, you're walking the halls with a group of guys, mm-hmm. right? And, we've met a lot of those guys. Some of them have been guests on the show. Tell us a little bit about the value of working with those umbrella groups like the Police Conference in New York and the Public Employees Conference.
Yeah. So it's absolutely invaluable. Those are the two major groups that encompass both labor, that's the Public Employees Conference, PEC, and then PCNY, or the Police Conference of New York, is a group of agencies from across the state that get together. There's about 13 of us from major police departments that are capable of releasing someone like me to be up there full time. So you'll have a group of about 13 of us, just law enforcement officers, that will walk the halls either together as a group, or we'll hack up the day once a week and we'll say, these are your tasks and these are another group's tasks, and we'll go get stuff done. A lot of what we do, almost everything that we do, benefits law enforcement across the state. So by dividing up the work that way and stuff and getting these things done and seeing key people, having meetings and stuff, we're impacting law enforcement that doesn't even know what we're doing up there. Mm-hmm. But those groups, without the input from those groups like PCNY and PEC, I would say probably none of this gets done. If no one was up there representing us, I think we'd fall to the wayside and would be, we'd be a punching bag without fighting back. So.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And it just shows the value of taking on these fights with as large a number as we can when it comes to membership, mm-hmm. right? So those umbrella groups where, any given union, like, in the PBA, we have 1,800 members, but if we add our 1,800 with, groups from around the state, and all of a sudden we become, PCNY's group has 50,000 cops in it, or whatever the final number is. That's a lot bigger of an influence to be able to have to create these changes and show that this is how certain reforms have negatively affected working class Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. And that argument played itself out in the Tier 5 and 6 reforms. So there were a couple of different things. The teachers were looking for an age reduction.
Right.
The municipal employees, that non-law enforcement, were looking for the brackets to be reduced and compressed, or the percentages to be lowered. From us, what was important for us, for law enforcement, was arguing about the overtime. We didn't want overtime to fall to the wayside. But you look at, PCMY represents 50,000 officers. Teachers represent, at a minimum, somewhere between 700,000 and 1.2 million, between the other unions. So you're fighting to keep your voice heard when you're, in the shadow of such large organizations. So these smaller organizations are integral to, keeping the message out there, and you have to be loud, you have to be aggressive, and you have to get it done. And, it was a nice settlement for all the groups, I think, this year.
Yeah, I agree. So if you break down all the wins, there's stuff, obviously, that was more valuable to police officers, but there was stuff that was more valuable to teachers. Mm-hmm. There was stuff that was more valuable to, say, custodial workers in government buildings. Yeah. So there was a level of winning for everybody here, and that's because of the collective effort of those groups.
Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. The state had to make it fair, and they did the best they could to evenly divide it. I'll always say we could just get a little bit more,
Of course.
A lot of posts. I was a little concerned because a lot of politicians were posting right after the budget passed, we fixed tiers 5 and 6. My opinion is you didn't fix it. You made a fix. I don't think we're done yet. I hope that message gets out that I don't think we're done yet. That wasn't it. One of the big things John and I have spoken extensively about, and I think it's going to become, I know it's very important for us. It's going to be on my priority list going forward, and hopefully it'll expand to a priority list for some of these larger groups. And that's the governor's salary cap.
Right.
That affects our membership immensely.
Yeah. And that's an excellent point, because pensionable earnings get capped at whatever the New York State governor's salary is here in New York. And with the way inflation has been and the way cost of living affects our members here in New York, there's going to be a time where, that governor's salary isn't going to be that same livable wage anymore. So we got to either get rid of that cap or give the governor a raise.
Yeah, exactly, without a doubt. So I know it's a priority, and we'll make it, and we'll try and expand it into those other groups that are affected too.
Right.
So, we're not done yet. That's the best way I could put it. So,
Chris, how much is weighing back and forth of getting benefits for the membership now compared to later on as far as the pension system goes?
Well, we fight for everything. We look at everything. What benefits them now and what's long-term benefits? There are some things we argue for that aren't realized until retirement. And it's hard for someone who's active and young and maybe in his late 20s, maybe looking at getting married or something, who's looking for more money in his pocket. I break them down into those two things. What's money in your pocket now, and what's a long-term benefit that's going to pay you for life? Right. And we fight, it's almost like a menu, you try and get what you can that year, and, you hope for the best. As session goes on, you start to see what can potentially move and, what can't, and what's a dead end. So,
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up that long-term thinking, because part of the wins we've spoken about over the last couple of years has had to do with post-retirement earnings as well. A lot of our members, after you're retired for a year or two, you want to re-enter the workforce, get some sort of schedule back. They become high school security guards or school janitors. There's limits on earnings when you take jobs like that before it'll actually start to reduce your pensionable benefit. So we were able to get those dollar amounts raised last year or the year before.
Yeah. So that's something we've argued for up there, and they've done that.
So a little more in line with that long-term thinking and the post-retirement earnings, we've spoken a few times about COLA, cost of living adjustments. And I mean, the current iteration of COLA hasn't been changed in over 2 decades. And I think some of those numbers that they use to adjust our pensions post-retirement are a little outdated, especially based on current cost of living. What are some of your thoughts, John, about maybe maybe some sort of approaches we might be able to take in the future with adjusting COLA?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, when you look at COLAs from other states, the New York State COLA it's
subpar.
Yeah, I mean, to put it politely. Yeah, so essentially it's only based on your first $18,000 of your pension. And then I believe it's capped at, it's 1/2 of the rate of inflation up to 3%. So you're getting, 1.5% of 18,000. That's meaningless in the grand scheme of things. And, that's not even, a cup of coffee a month. So that's something I think, to Chris's point, we were, speaking about earlier. COLA, the governor's salary, those are, definitely on our radar for the future to get just get the COLA to something meaningful. Because again, when you have inflation running at 5, 6, 7%, you're already in the negative for the year.
Right.
And the COLA does nothing to, keep up the cost of living at all.
Right. And I mean, to me, that's something that I think should be at the forefront of priorities for, law enforcement throughout the state and firefighters too, because there are some, fire departments that become pensioners too. We have these early retirements for a reason. We can't run around chasing bad guys in our 60s. It doesn't do anything for the public if you have 65-year-old men trying to climb a fence. It just doesn't make sense. That's why we have these years of service, and we can retire in our mid to late 40s, depending on our ages when we get hired, or into our 50s. But same thing with firefighters. And because we're retiring younger, our pension gets eaten away at by inflation that much earlier and younger. So by the time we're at the ages where people usually are retired and not working at all anymore in their 70s, our pensions aren't worth the same.
Yeah, I think, and Chris hit on a little bit earlier. So when when you're going through the process to try to achieve pension reform, you have all these different interests, So, a teachers union doesn't want what a police union wants, which doesn't want what a corrections union want. Something like a COLA is something that everyone can get behind. It affects all of us universally. We're all going to retire at one point in time. We're all going to have our pensions. So that, I think, is something that all the groups can kind of get behind and put together a unified front.
Yeah, I think so too. Me personally, I would love to see that become the next big focus for us when it comes to the pensions. So, Chris, we're talking a lot about the pension reforms and some of the steps we've gotten to increasing tiers 5 and 6, making it look a little bit more like 2. What are some of the other stuff you were working on up in Albany this year?
So there were a couple of things that were priorities. I mean, we had the HALO law, which is kind of new and cutting edge for New York State, at least, trying to create a little bit of distance when law enforcement officers are actually engaged in some type of enforcement action or patrol or maybe on a fixed post. We see all these videos, people monetizing, antagonizing police officers while they're trying to do their job, or people interceding in law enforcement engaged in their work. So we were working heavily on the HALO law. Similar to all other legislation, a lot of things take years to get done because there's a lot of legal research that goes into it. There's constitutional issues and stuff. So we're going to keep that a priority going forward. Some of the other stuff, 50A reforms, the unfounded and the unsubstantiated claims. We would love it to be all types of claims, even unsubstantiated and stuff. The legislature passed Clean Slate. Clean Slate took convictions, and then after a certain amount of years, based on a sliding scale, those records are wiped out. So you're convicted of a crime, and then eventually you get a clean slate. But we're still fighting, and this is year after year, we're still making this argument up there about these even unsubstantiated and unfounded complaints. They won't even clean slate those, which is baffling to me. The hypocrisy of how that disparity works is crazy.
Right.
But that was another key thing we were working on. So those are two things that didn't get done this year. In terms of positives that got done, we had the bridge naming for Detective Stephen Mullen, who passed away with 9/11 cancer. Yes. So The state usually passes a large group of bills for law enforcement officers naming bridges after them, usually related to close to their home or where they may have passed in the line of duty. So this bridge is at Sunrise Highway and Route 110, so they name the bridge after him. Probably down the road, once the signs are produced and everything, we'll do some sort of ceremony. So
yeah, that would be great. That's well deserved for Stephen and the family, for them to be able to see their father and husband honored in such a way.
Yeah.
That's great. But I do want to just touch a little bit more on the 50A aspect. I mean, when you say unsubstantiated, because a lot of people out in the real world don't necessarily even know what that means. That means this is a complaint that was investigated and there wasn't enough evidence to say, like, yeah, the cop was in the wrong.
Absolutely. Yep.
So basically you found not guilty of the accusation.
Absolutely. Yep. There's unfounded means it didn't happen. Unsubstantiated means, well, there's an accusation, but there's no evidence to prove or disprove this case. So there's nothing there, basically. And what happens is, we've seen it. We know this, but maybe the general public doesn't. These type of complaints have been weaponized, whereas when you're facing a criminal conviction, what some attorneys may do is they may say, oh, well, once you've told me that scenario, you should file a complaint about that. It muddies the criminal waters for the trial. And it creates this persona that there may be an illegality at hand or something. So they use it as a weaponized tool for a criminal case, or maybe to try and paint the officer in his testimony with some sort of broad brush that there was some reason to give reasonable doubt to his story. Meanwhile, probably most likely never occurred. So now this complaint gets investigated separate from the criminal aspect of why they may have made that complaint. Then it gets investigated by the department, and the department either makes it unfounded or unsubstantiated. These are staying on your record for your entire career. And one of the things, what we were able to chip away at a little bit and came together in the last week was, we don't agree with it, but what the legislature seemed to think was, well, once you retire, we can clear the air and then seal everything. But let's talk about modern day technology. The internet doesn't go away. Right. So it's not an argument we're accepting, you know. So we'll continue to fight that the hypocrisy between what they did with Clean Slate and how they're treating us with these complaints is just cannot stand.
Think about it from like the civilian side too, or any other line of work. If you were ever falsely accused of something or found not guilty of some sort of crime accusation, nobody's going to find that. Like, it's not going to be on your record. Mm-hmm. But for some reason it is for us.
Yeah. And one of the other things that they miss totally is victims. And I think I talked about this in my last podcast. I covered victims because that's always in my mind when I'm up there. You know, we are here as law enforcement to take care of the public. The public is victimized by a criminal. That victim deserves every bit of justice they're entitled to. And then what ends up happening is, you get a case where the victim needs you to testify, and you get up on that stand and they start talking about unsubstantiated and unfounded complaints, and they try and muddy the water and undermine your testimony.
It has nothing to do with the actual case.
Absolutely not. And the only person who's suffering from that is the victim who's not getting justice, because they're muddying the waters to hedge their bets in terms of that criminal trial. So
that's most of the anti-police legislation that they've had over the last number of years. It affects the victim, not so. It affects the police definitely, but definitely the most important person is the victim.
Absolutely, without a doubt. Whether it be, you know, the trial portion of it, or just the public headlines that end up coming out of it, all of the legislation that goes towards, handcuffing the police in what they do really has a trickle-down effect where the victim is getting victimized twice, without a doubt.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it sounds like it should just be common sense, and hopefully it does get fixed sooner rather than later. So, John, one of the things that you head up here in the PBA office is the Deferred Comp Committee. You're the chair of Deferred Comp for the county, and we've spoken a lot about pension benefits and some of the increases we've gotten for our members here recently. But deferred compensation is another part of that retirement equation. So can you please just tell us a little bit about what's going on with deferred comp right now and a little bit of what your role is as a chairman?
Sure. So I don't give myself too much credit. So I'm the vice chair of deferred comp.
Vice chair. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So again, I've been on the committee now for 6 years. What an incredible plan we have. So our board is made up of a equal amount of labor and management on the board. So we actually just passed a milestone with our plan. We just passed $3 billion on their assets. So that's the size of, comparatively speaking, we have more money than some states have in their plans.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Our average member has upwards of, I think the latest numbers is like 250,000 in the plan. So it provides a real, incentive to, save money, currently on a pre-tax basis to supplement, your retirement, income.
Right. And the importance of this plan is when we talk about the members of the plan, it's not just the PBA members. It's not just police officers, detectives, supervisors. It's all county employees.
Correct. Yeah. All county employees are eligible for the plan.
Right.
Yeah.
So, when we had Tom DiNapoli on the show, he spoke about the three-legged stool of retirement. And part of that three-legged stool is, pension, whatever else you could save, and Social Security, and like deferred comp is part of that savings, the three legs of the retirement stool. So for our younger members out there who are debating whether or not to get involved with deferred comp because they're already counting on pension and Social Security, what sort of advice would you give those younger guys that are debating which way to manage their own deferred comp?
Yeah. So, we've all been there, and you see me give to speech to new recruits. And I kind of speak to them like I would speak to my children. And it's like, look, you're going to tell me you can't afford to do this. I'm going to tell you can't afford not to do this. Mm-hmm. So many times you'll see the scenarios where you have the individual who saves for the first 10 years of their career, and then they stop. And then you have individual 2 who saves nothing for the first 10, but starts at year 11 and goes through year 20. Equally invested in the same investments. That first person is always going to come out ahead of time because you can never get back those formative years of compounding. So that's why I always tell the recruits, I know it's tough. I know you're in the academy, you're at a lower salary. Do yourself a favor, sign up for the minimum. If you sign up now, you can always change it. You can always stop it, if things get a little tight. But I'm a big believer in inertia. If you don't sign up for the plan initially, you're always going to be able to find an excuse to not do it. Where if you do it right off the bat, you can always go in and change it. And it just, it avoids, hey, we all come across, something pops up, something breaks in the house, and you find a reason that, you need money for something else. So at least being in the plan from the beginning, you have the option. You can lower the contributions when times are tough, the expense hits, and then you raise it back up.
Mm-hmm. I think especially now with the savings from the contribution limits, like you should be, if you couldn't afford it before, now you can just slide that extra percent that you're saving from contributing to the pension system and put it right into deferred comp, so it's helping you in retirement anyway.
Correct. To your point, it was money you were spending already. So if you were at, you say you were at 5% and now you're dropping down to 3%. Well, for all intents and purposes, that money was already spent. So let's take that 2% and put it into the deferred comp plan or some other type of savings instrument.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. It's another way for our younger members who are now realizing this savings to still put money away. If you were already budgeting, with your bills for spending that money, put it away so you have another benefit for your retirement. It's an excellent point. For our members that don't take full advantage of the plan early on in their career, we do have catch-up options too. So maybe you could describe how those work a little bit for everybody too.
Yeah, so a deferred compensation is similar to a 401k in many ways. It has the same contribution limits, things like that. But a great thing we have in deferred that's unique to deferred compensation is called a 3-year special catch-up. So essentially what it is it allows, so every year a plan has a maximum. So for instance, this year the plan maximum is for ordinary contributions is $24,500. So now by IRS regulations, when you're within 3 years of your normal retirement or 20 years, you have the ability to go back and catch up for years in the past that you didn't fully maximize. So what I would do is, that person comes in, they want to, do their catch up. I would look through what's called their Pharos history. So I'll see every year when they work for the county, how much they earned, what they contributed to the plan, what they're eligible to contribute. And then it's going to give me a total number of, underutilized contributions. And then based on that, we come up with a plan where they can contribute, extra money into the plan. So for instance, somebody who has a significant amount of underutilized contributions this year, instead of contributing $24,500, they can contribute $49,000 into the plan. So, very, incredible tax savings to the member.
Yeah, it's just another great tool that all county employees have at their disposal in order to retire with dignity in the future.
Yes, exactly. And, there were some recent changes with the IRS regulations regarding plans under Secure 2.0 Act. So right now we have another interesting part of our plan. In addition to the 3-year catch-up, we have what's called 50 plus. And then 60 to 63, wherein you can contribute extra money into the plan solely based on your age. There's no underutilization of contributions in the past. It's based solely on your age. But what happened now is with the IRS regulation changes, there are certain caveats where that money has to be put into the plan on a Roth or post-tax basis. So we currently do not have Roth on our plan. Therefore, there's a cohort of our members who cannot make those contributions. But now they can pivot and utilize the 3-year catch-up. Mm-hmm. So it's an avenue where they can still get that extra, pre-tax money into the plan.
Right. Obviously, the more options, the better everybody is. It would be great to be able to develop that Roth option eventually, but there are still plenty of options for our members to be able to put money away and, again, try to build that dignified retirement that we've all spoken to Comptroller Tom DiNapoli about.
Yes, yeah, most definitely. Ideally, you want to retire and hopefully never have to, to work again. So, a little bit of planning, early in your career would go a long way towards making that happen.
Yeah. So, guys, this is all stuff that I feel like we could talk about all day, but we had already spoken a little bit about the value of umbrella groups, and everybody's actually going to be going to a meeting in the next couple of minutes with one of those umbrella organizations. So I hate to cut the conversation short, but is there anything that we were kind of talking about today that you want to maybe re-hit, maybe get one more detail out there that we didn't have a chance to touch on before we go meet with the statewide alliance?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, our big topic was, pension reform today. It's always important to take a step back and kind of do a 30,000-foot view. Yes, when you look at any one snippet, it doesn't look like a lot, but you need to take the totality. You need to understand that, reduced contributions went along with the overtime exclusion, which built upon the 3-year final average salary. So you need to keep on looking back and just, view it in its, totality. I think that's the most important thing to take away from it.
And it's funny you talk about looking back, because in my mind, the first thing I was thinking is looking forward, because the way I handle Albany is once session's over, I'm working on the next session.
Right.
So because you can't change anything that happened, we got what we got. All I do is focus on, all right, what didn't we get and what's coming next session? So, I have my priorities ready in my head, thinking whether it be pension, civilian complaints, HALO law, pro-law enforcement legislation, and already thinking about next session and what we're going to do next year.
This is one other thing I just want to end off on. I'm a Tier 6 member. I know Chris talked about before that a lot of the legislators were claiming that they fixed Tier 6. They haven't fixed Tier 6. They made some fixes to it gradually, and gradually over time it will continue to be fixed. But I think it's very important for our Tier 5 and Tier 6 members to get involved. This is something that's going to have to come from us to push the pressure on the legislature to make these changes. So it really has to be us that's going out to these rallies, that's getting involved politically, that's going to put the pressure on them to continue to make these changes. I think that's extremely important going forward.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point too, Tanner. Thank you. So guys, I appreciate you coming on. Like I said, I feel like we could talk about this stuff all day, but we have an umbrella group meeting to go to right now.
Yes.
So thanks, guys. Appreciate you coming on.
No, thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tanner here from On Patrol with the Suffolk PBA. Just a reminder to all our viewers to like, subscribe, follow, and share our content across all platforms.